Thank you, Mr. Alejo. Ms. Ekman, you're recognized at your desk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise as the chair of the LGBT caucus to lend our voices to supporting AGR 2 and to thank the Armenian Legislative Caucus for bringing this forward. I'd also like to acknowledge and honor the people who traveled here today. I speak also as a licensed clinical social worker, as somebody who's done a lot of therapy with a lot of people who have been victims and survivors of horrific abuse. And I can say that the one thing that occurs when the perpetrator does not acknowledge what happened, when nobody acknowledges what happened, when someone is abused, when someone is murdered, when someone is killed, it makes the hurt even more hurtful. When we do it to individuals, it causes lifelong scars. When we do it to a whole people, to a whole population, it creates worldwide scars. And members, that's what we are called to do here today. And for every genocide that occurs, for every ill that occurs, that we have to acknowledge it. We have to say, we see your pain. We see your surviving. We see your resilience. And together we begin to heal as we continue to call upon those who perpetrated the oppression, who perpetrated the genocide, to take responsibility for what they did. We stand with the rest of the Californians in this great state to say, we acknowledge what happened. I stand in strong support of AGR 2.
Thank you, Ms. Ekman. Ms. Brown, you're recognized at your desk.
Earlier, one of my colleagues said, silence of our friends. I'm a friend. I cannot be silent. Our lives connect. During a time of enslavement in our own country's history, millions died of my people died in the Middle Passage. Most Armenians today didn't grow up in their homeland, just as African Americans don't know their homelands. We connect. I understand on a personal level what Armenians feel. I've seen the museum that catalogs these horrific atrocities, the lost lives, the historic documents, the cathedrals, and the land. I have a special connection to the people of Armenia, and I ask that you support AJR 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Brown. At this time, I will recognize Ms. Olson at your desk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I too rise in support of AJR 2. Today we join together in remembering the unimaginable atrocities that occurred against the Armenian people during the Armenian genocide. And we call on the world, as many colleagues have done, to recognize it as such and to teach it to our children as the genocide that it was. We remember the 1.5 million innocent men, women, and children who were marched to their deaths, the victims of a mass ethnic cleansing. 1915 may seem like the ancient past, but it was really just 100 short years ago. In our uncertain world today, it is not a stretch of the imagination to think that these unthinkable acts could happen again to some other people. And that's why freedom-loving people must remember atrocities like the Armenian genocide and resolve to never let it happen again. After providing assistance to the victims of the Armenian genocide, as our colleague Mr. Nazarian so well described, California became the largest Armenian population in the United States. I am proud to represent one of the largest Armenian populations in California. Armenian Americans have become leaders in business, education, government, and virtually every other field. As we remember what happened 100 years ago, we also salute the story of perseverance and rebuilding that has characterized the Armenian experience here in California. As I close, I want to pay tribute to some of them, like our colleagues Katja Shajian, Adrien Nazarian, the wife of Assemblymember Scott Wilk, Vanessa, our former colleague Greg Agazarian, who served in this House for 6 years. California was proud to have an Armenian American as our governor in George Deukmejian. We remember the legacy of former Modesto City Councilman, farmer, and great philanthropist Harry Kaligian. Some of you, a few years back, may have had a chance to meet with Harry when he came to Sacramento with his wife, Carol Channing, who were very strong advocates for arts education. We salute business leaders like Haig Barbarian of the Modesto Nut Company, religious leaders like Deacon Daniel Adenian of the Holy Cross Armenian Church in Turlock, who's here with us today, and the noted director and actor Veyhan Musekian, who is also from Turlock. We also recognize the late Nora Naragi of the prominent agricultural family in Modesto, and for whom the Science Hall at CSU Stanislaus is appropriately named. And finally, I want to highlight the work of a group of ambitious, eager students at Cal State Stanislaus in starting an I Recognize campaign on Facebook in relation to the Armenian genocide, which has attracted already more than 4,200 members. And so today we stand together with Californians' Armenian community in keeping the memory of those who lost their lives alive in our hearts and in our minds. May we never forget, never again.
Thank you, Member Olson. Member Williams, you're recognized at your table. Yes.
Members, the Asian Pacific Islander Caucus stands in strong solidarity with the nearly 1 million Armenian Americans that live in the state of California. And I can tell you, as I was a staffer for Jack Scott that drafted one of the previous versions of this resolution, the research that I did in doing so was horrifying and shocking to know of the actual events that transpired in the waning years of World War I. Members, it is something that robs the Armenian people of the acknowledgement that creates justice. But it is also something that robs the world and Turks and Turkish Americans of something even more fundamental, the acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Just as we are a nation that has acknowledged our own wrongdoing in past events, we must implore Turkish and Arabic-speaking nations to acknowledge this. For I think that there is no way you as a people can prevent such things from transpiring again unless you know the mistakes of your own forefathers. So members, we today implore the people of Turkey to acknowledge these events, and I would even dare say that a nation and a people cannot be right with God and the world community unless such things are acknowledged. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Member Williams. Assemblymember Wilk, you recognized at your desk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members, and guests. Today, I rise in support of AJR 2 relating to the commemoration of the centennial anniversary of the Armenian genocide of 1915. The Armenian genocide is not an allegation, a personal opinion, or a point of view, but rather a widely documented fact supported by an overwhelming body of historical evidence. These words were spoken in 2008 by then Senator Barack Obama. And behind these historical facts are real people with real stories that cry out to be heard. My wife, Vanessa's great aunt, Anik Bogosian, was a survivor of the genocide. Anik had 5 brothers, a husband, 2 children. During World War I, 2 of her brothers, Krikor and Anik, fled Turkey to emigrate to America, and Anik joined the U.S. military to help the Allied forces. The rest of the Bogosian family remained behind. The young Turks massacred Anik's 3 brothers and husband. She and her children were sent on a forced desert death march. Anik's infant died in her arms, her toddler soon afterwards, and she was raped by Turkish soldiers and left for dead in a pile of rotting corpses. But she wasn't dead, and it started an arduous journey that led her to a family reunion with her brothers in America. She eventually settled in the San Fernando Valley, and Anik and her new husband raised 3 children who grew up to be a fire captain, insurance broker, and real estate agent. Her second family, the Shahinians, lived the American dream. Fortunately for me, Krikor and Anik made the wise decision to leave for America. Anik's daughter, Alice Bogosian Safoyan, is my mother-in-law. If Anik had chose to stay in Turkey, he may very well have met the same fate as his 1.5 million fellow Armenians, which means my beautiful wife, Vanessa, would not be among us today, nor our children, Scott Jr. or Allison Grace, have ever been born. On this 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, There's so much to celebrate as the Armenians not only survived, but thrived. It's also appropriate to grieve those who are lost, as well as those never to be because their ancestors' lives were struck down by the Ottoman Turks. So thank you for allowing me to share Onyx's story, but hers is only one of millions of stories, both tragic and triumphant, of the American saga. I believe Turkey is held in spiritual bondage due to the darkness of denial, and true healing can occur without an official acknowledgement of the atrocities perpetrated on the Armenian people. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope." It is my hope and prayer that today's resolution begins to step towards recognition, reconciliation, and restoration. I thank this body for its moral leadership in confronting this issue and ask for an aye vote on AJR 2.
Thank you, Member. Well, at this time, seeing no other discussion and debate, Mr. Nazarian, you're welcome to close, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to take a moment and first and foremost thank everyone who's here with us today from near and far. I also would like to thank all of my colleagues, all of our colleagues, Mr. Speaker. It's always very powerful when those who don't share our last names speak more passionately sometimes than even we can in describing our past. And I'm sure your father's family would have been very proud to see both of us here. This year we began an essay contest of trying to get students involved and engaged in talking about the genocide and researching it and learning it. I ask all of my colleagues to join me next year in recommending their teachers and students to participate. And with that, I'd like to ask you all to vote yes on this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nazarian. Mr. Nazarian has requested immediate transmittal to the Senate. At this time, a vote is required for this item. The clerk will open the roll. All those vote who desire to vote. All those vote who desire to vote. All those vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll and tally the vote. 79 ayes and no votes. The resolution is adopted. Thank you, folks. The resolution is adopted and immediately transmittal to the Senate. Mr. Nazarian requests immediate transmittal to the Senate, AJR 2. Thank you. And at this point, we were prepared to have a special guest with us who's 101 years young, but unfortunately, Ms. Serobian was stuck in the airport with her granddaughter and won't be here. But with the permission of Madam Speaker, we're allowed to bring her at another date and honor her on the floor. So unfortunately, she wouldn't be able to join us today. But a little bit of her background. Mrs. Serobian was born in Turkey in 1914 to Aposh and Esther Aposyan. She survived the genocide and recalls hearing children cry as they passed her house on their death march into the desert. Her family was spared due to her father's friendship with a Turkish leader. In 1921, her family left Antep, fleeing by 2 horse-drawn carriages. Throughout her life, she has helped orphans of the genocide and other less fortunate. Ms. Serobian celebrated her 101st birthday in January of this year. Join me in recognition of her longevity. I would also like to take a moment and welcome all of you here today in the chambers, in the galleries. Welcome. Our keynote speaker is former member of this House and the first Armenian to serve on the Los Angeles City Council. Please welcome back Mr. Paul Krikorian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oh, thank you, members. Thank you, members. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Speaker Atkins, members. It's a truly great honor to be back in the People's House again. Within this chamber, for much of our state's history, those who are suffering or oppressed or excluded have found comfort and remedy in the leadership and the actions of the people who've sat in these very desks. So on behalf of the entire Armenian American community of California, every Armenian American, I want to thank all of you for your service to our state. I want to thank you for your eloquence in speaking today. I want to thank you for this commemoration and for your ongoing strong support of the Armenian cause. Today's remembrance allows us, all of us, to mourn an almost unimaginable loss. It allows us to honor and celebrate those who survived and the generosity of this state in saving them, and also to reflect on the consequences of injustice and impunity and what that continues to mean to all of us today. And yet, when we try to comprehend the massiveness of horror of this genocide or of any genocide, our mind fails. We tend to get lost in the cold statistics that we know don't tell the whole story. 1.5 million dead, another million displaced. Our mind can't grasp numbers like this. It's too big to envision. It's too far away. It's too long ago. The victims don't look quite like us. So for a moment, I'd like to just put it into a more personal context. Many of us here in this chamber can tell you about personal contexts of this genocide that we share, losses that our families shared. But all of us in this room share a moment of grief and mourning that I want you to think about for a minute. Take yourself back to the morning of September 11th, 2001, and remember the feelings that you had when you turned on the television and you saw those towers falling. Remember the feelings of rage, the feelings of fear and confusion, the feeling of grief as you tried to do the calculus of how many people must have been in those towers. And if you're like me, you remember the days that followed as well. You remember seeing the pictures coming from New York of families who printed up flyers of their loved one and put it on a telephone pole, put it on a wall in the hopes, the desperate hopes, that their loved one might somehow have survived. And we saw them by the hundreds. We saw the pictures of the little girl wearing her favorite dress, maybe missing a tooth in her big smile. We saw it in the father in the backyard barbecue. We saw the pictures of someone's grandfather, maybe putting a decoration on a Christmas tree. And as we saw those pictures, and we realized that those pictures represented people from every continent on the globe, from virtually every nation on the globe, from every faith, every age, some rich, some poor, we realized that for all their differences, they were our children. They were our brothers, our mothers, our grandparents. And as we saw that, the loss of that day became ours as well. So now, I'd like you to think of this. The Armenian genocide, the loss of life in the Armenian genocide, was the equivalent of the September 11th attack every week, week in and week out, for 10 consecutive years. And all of those faces, all of those individuals that we saw that day, in those weeks, we could see the same faces, the same children, the same parents, the same loved ones in the aftermath of the Armenian genocide. The Armenian people were violently uprooted from their historic homelands where they'd lived for 3 millennia, an ancient culture that had enriched our world long before Julius Caesar was born, was eliminated from its historic lands. Churches that were already centuries old when Christopher Columbus set sail were desecrated and destroyed. And we know that the entire world suffered loss as well. the loss of the unfulfilled potential of those who might have inspired us through their art, who might have changed the way we view the world through science, who might have saved countless lives through medical discoveries, but who instead breathed their last breath in the deserts of Syria. But we also know this state did not sit idly by. As news filtered in about the genocide to this country, California acted, as did the rest of America. Californians leapt into action to support Near East Relief, the first major philanthropic organized effort of this nation's history to help people overseas. Those Californians set the standards for generosity that would make up a part of California's character for many generations to come. And like so many other groups of immigrants that came before and have come since, many of the survivors and their descendants, many of whom are here with us today, found refuge and hope and the opportunity to create a new life in this state. Armenian Americans have disproportionately succeeded against all odds and obstacles, and they've added immeasurably to making California the state that we all enjoy today. And in each of those successes, each of those personal victories, the Armenian people have declared their victory over barbarism and bigotry. They've proven that the perpetrators of the Armenian genocide failed. Instead of being buried, they've risen. Although 100 years have passed since the genocide began, it remains vitally important for all of us to remember its lessons and also to demand justice. As all of you know, and many of you have just spoken to, the government of Turkey still denies its absolute culpability for this crime. Turkey hopes the world will forget, will forgive, will move on. But we will not. We cannot. Because we know, and they know, that denial is the final phase of genocide. After the homes are ashes, after the bodies of the murdered have turned to dust, the last evidence to be distinguished is memory. Only then is the annihilation complete and the crime a success. But we in California are here to tell the world that we will always remember and we will always demand justice. Because the Armenian genocide is not a page in a history book. The Armenian genocide and its perpetrators' denial and impunity enabled the darkest hours of the 20th century. And sadly, it still continues to shape the direction of humanity in the 21st. The world will continue to suffer genocide until we reject hate in all of its forms and hold accountable the perpetrators of all crimes against humanity. From the gas chambers of Auschwitz to the killing fields of Cambodia, from the cities of Rwanda to the deserts of Darfur, the tragic and unavoidable lesson of our time is this: when we allow ourselves to slumber in the waking sleep of indifference and impunity, that is when evil will prevail. But when we stand together and see the pain of all of our brothers and our sisters as our own, we can change the world. And we've done it in this state again and again. When we together in one voice sing, "We shall overcome," we do overcome. When we together in one voice chant, "Si se puede," it does become possible. And perhaps if we truly commit ourselves to saying together, once and for all, in one voice, "Never again," and truly mean it, then perhaps we can make it so. The Armenian struggle for remembrance and for justice is your struggle. It's our struggle. And for our own sake, we must all affirm in one voice that we will persevere in that struggle to the end. Baikar Minchev Verch. Each time the world witnesses a recurrence of genocide without acting, each time we avert our gaze to avoid thinking of the unthinkable, each time a tyrant or a terrorist avoids accountability for unspeakable acts of cruelty and barbarism, we all suffer a loss of some of our own humanity. We become more calloused, more immune to outrage, and we guarantee that the next atrocity will become more likely. So today we remember. We remember to mourn those who perished. We remember to honor those who survived and flourished. We remember to thank America for its compassion and its warm embrace of our salvation. And most important, we remember for the sake of our own humanity today. The great Armenian poet Siamanto, who was himself among the first victims of the Armenian genocide, spoke to this obligation when he wrote, "And the spirits of all the dead tonight, through my own eyes and soul, are awaiting the dawning of the light, so that to humanize the cruelty of our inhuman lives, perhaps from above, a drop of light may fall upon the murdered and the murderer alike." Members, the Armenians of California, thank you for providing that drop of light again today and always. May we all move out of the darkness and into the dawn together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Krikorian. At this time, as the lights are dimmed, please give your attention to the screen in the front of the chamber to view accounts from survivors and witnesses of the genocide.